Story 1. For some reason my mother hated me. As a little girl I could never understand why she treated me so much worse than my three other siblings, and I would often go to my grandmother and ask why my mother did not love me. She never gave me a straight answer and would say my mother loved me in the only way she knew how. That answer confused me because she seemed to love my siblings just fine. Her love was extremely toxic, and she did a different kind of damage to my other siblings. When I say my mother treated me badly, it started with her picking fights with me. She would constantly nitpick everything I did, chastise me, and then punish me harshly for things that could have been handled with a gentle scolding. As I got older, she cursed at me and called me names. She would often ignore me for days, and when she spoke to me it was to make me the butt of a cruel joke or to tell me she hated me. Yes, my mother looked me in the eyes and told me she hated me. She was a drug addict and alcoholic, and she claimed the emotional abuse she put me through as a child was the effect of the drugs, and that it wasn't even that bad. Those things tore at me over time. The cruelty, the words, the constant ignoring, all very different from how she treated my other three siblings. She was very close with one brother and my sister. She spent time with them constantly, took them anywhere, and bought them whatever they wanted, which made me resent them. My sister sometimes rubbed it in my face that our mother loved her more. It was her way of wielding power over me and one of the things that made my anger bubble over onto innocent people. I just wanted to be loved and accepted, to be cared for and cherished as a child should be. When I didn't get that, I plotted how I could get her love and affection. In my screwed-up mind, I thought that if I got rid of my older brother and younger sister, I would be one of the only people left for her to love. I planned on killing my brother. It was not a passing thought. It was a constant idea and a plan I put into place to end his life so I could make room in my mother's heart for me. I feel ashamed writing it. It was a dark time and I was also incredibly mentally ill. My brother was addicted to pain medication, and my parents were desperately trying to get him clean. Ironically, at the same time he was going on a drug-induced rampage, my sister had shattered her leg on a trampoline. She was on heavy pain pills, and while my mother was doing everything to keep my brother away from drugs, she left my sister and her medication in my care. One day, while my mother was out dealing with my brother and my sister was sleeping, I took the rest of my sister's pills. She was terrified of becoming addicted after watching what our mother and my brother were going through, so there were many pills left. I waited for my brother to come back. When I heard him come through his window, his room was next to mine, I went into the kitchen and made him a glass of juice. Earlier that day, I had crushed the pills into a powder and mixed them into the juice. I went up to his room, knocked on the door, and offered him the cocktail of various prescription drugs. He took the juice, and right before he was about to drink it, I had a sudden thought. How could I do this to my own brother? I snatched the drink back, and it spilled on the carpet. He was high and furious, but at least he was alive. I never tried anything like that again. Felt sick, wrong, evil. What kind of person thinks about killing their brother? Besides, his dying would not have made my mother love me anymore. She would likely have resented me for living instead of him. So that's the sad, sick story of how I almost killed my brother. I did not carry it out, and in time things improved. My brother got clean and now has a happy family. I am in college. My sister's leg healed, and my mother left us after a while. But that is a story for another time. Story 2. I have two sisters, one older and one younger. My mom worked hard to make each of us feel special and loved. My dad? Not so much. He called my older sister Princess and my little sister Little Buddy. For whatever reason, I kinda got forgotten. I didn't mind most of the time. I found my dad annoying, demanding, and at times unreasonable. I hated the way he bullied my mom and lashed out about things that did not make sense. I thought of my dad as a total brat. He'd have a bad day at work and find someone to take it out on, usually my mom and me, but I still tried to cuddle up with him and felt hurt when he'd shrug me off and tell me I needed to shower. I made gifts for him, got good grades, won poetry contests, and won awards through Bible quiz. I never argued, but it never seemed to work. Before long, he'd find something to yell at me about, things that usually did not make sense. If my little sister and I fought, it was always my fault. My feet turned in. I hated when my dad came to my sporting events because seeing me run with inturned feet seemed to humiliate him. One time I was running from one base to another, exhilarated because I'd done it because I'd hit a home run. The smile died on my face when I heard my dad yell, "Run with your feet straight. You look stupid." As a teen, my mom really stepped up and insisted he leave me alone. He was never physically abusive, but the way he spoke made you feel like he was trying to say something that would break you. When I was 15, he almost succeeded. I went through a couple of really bad months. A friend died, my dog died, we moved, and my mental health was tanking. A week after my friend died in a car accident, my dad asked, "So when are you going to get over it?" It took me by surprise because I wasn't crying or acting out. I was just sitting there, eating dinner with the family. My mom reacted, gasping, "John!" And the two of them began fighting again over my dad's need to mess with me. I sat there with my head down on the table, thinking, I'm not allowed to be sad. I'm not allowed to feel happy. Can't get mad. I'm in pain, and he finds it annoying. Just leave me alone, Dad. Leave me alone. Then it clicked. It wasn't me, it was him. My sisters could like and love him, but I didn't have to respect him. I was done trying to please him, trying to do the right things, trying to be the daughter he seemed to want. My goal became to avoid him. His seemed to be to have a target for his bullying. We were never going to have a healthy father-daughter relationship. Almost 10 years later, after my son was born, my dad tried to begin a new relationship with me because, for whatever reason, he latched on to my child. For the sake of my son, I let my dad have a relationship with him, but I was always watching, waiting for my son to develop a personality that might change the way my dad saw him. There was no way I was going to let my dad do to my son what he did to me. Fortunately, my dad died before any change could happen. I sat in the back at his funeral, dry-eyed and satisfied. Of course, my sisters were upset. They had good relationships with him. For my mom and me, it felt like the wicked which was finally gone. No more stress. No more unreasonable expectations. The eggshells we'd been walking on were swept away, and we could be content. I have an uncle in West Virginia who I started to see as a father figure. At first I jokingly called him Dad, testing the waters, waiting for him to remind me that he already had children and did not need an adopted daughter. I see him once a year, but I always felt he might find my need for a father annoying. A couple of weeks ago I asked him if he was coming up for Christmas. He said he couldn't. Then he said, "I love you, my daughter. Sorry this was long. I needed to get that out." Story 3. I was 16 years old. I finally decided to fight back against abusive parents. I only had to do it once to stop the physical abuse, but the psychological abuse kept happening. Story 4. I did not grow up with a healthy family. For a long time there was constant fighting, and things often went too far. I did not feel safe. It all culminated when I was 17. I was disowned and about to be kicked out. My past vindictive, defensive actions made my mother realize that kicking me out was not a good idea. The only reason I could still have a roof over my head was because my mother is not a citizen, and she knew I would have reported her for child abuse, which did occur, and that could have put her legal residency in jeopardy. So I had to threaten to burn the village in order to feel the warmth of safety. A lot of people have assumed my mother is undocumented, but she is not. I am not exactly sure how she remains in the United States, but she married my father, who is an American, and they divorced. She can live and work here, but she does not have the same government protections that I do. Story 5. When I was a teenager living in rural Alabama, I did not get along with my stepmother. She went out of her way to be as mean as she could. Once when she left the house, she took the mouse for the family computer so I could not use it while she was gone. I did her one better by unplugging a cord at the back and locking myself in my bedroom until she returned. She used my young stepsister against me and told her to say she had a present for me. As soon as I unlocked the door, my stepmother snatched the gift from my hand and started screaming about why the computer would not work. I had a metal pole and a glass of water within reach. I briefly considered hitting her with the pole, but instead I threw the glass of water in her face. I was sure I avoided jail that night. Story 6. I had a coworker at a retail job with no commissions who repeatedly sabotaged my sales so she could get credit applications and a high gross sales per hour, the store's average hourly sales. She would overhear my pitch for the required credit cards and then lie to the customer so they would apply. I had to try to rectify what she said while she hovered over me. She did other questionable things, and coworkers and customers reported her multiple times. One time, an 18-year-old customer came in to buy the most expensive desktop on display, a $2,500 model. She saw me make the sale, but I needed a manager to approve a small discount and my radio was dead. My coworker watched me the entire time, so I asked if she would call for the manager. She ignored me. I went to get the manager, and she printed out paperwork on the computer and tried to sell it to him. When I returned, she yelled at me in front of the customer to give her the sale because she had also worked there. I ignored her and did not give her the sale. When I reported this, as did the customer who was mortified, my boss told me to ignore her behavior and said she was a middle child so she does stuff like that. I was tired of the lack of action, so I filed a human resources complaint regarding her and 5 managers for not addressing it. They were reprimanded. Only one remains in a management position. The others were eventually demoted or laid off. Story 7. I used to work in fast food and was the only person in the store who did not smoke. Everyone else got to take a break to smoke, but because I did not smoke, I was not allowed to do so. I spoke to the owner about it and was rebuffed, so I went over his head to the company board. The owner was reprimanded and I received a large bonus on my next paycheck, but when they discovered I had reported them, I was fired immediately. It turned out they had been violating company policy in food preparation and storage, so I filed another report to corporate. The store was shut down for months and my former boss was fined 6 figures. Story 8. My brother is 10 years younger than I am and is a teenager. I regularly drive him to see his girlfriend and to his classes. Recently, he has become very disrespectful and rude. He is only nice to me if I have made food for him or if he needs a ride, which annoys me even more. I have seriously considered pulling over and making him walk the last 10 miles home. Story 9. My dad did not take any interest in my life from when I was 4. After my mom left him and I told him I was going to leave, he proceeded to do everything to get me to live with him, buying me things, saying my mom was not a fit parent, and trying to get custody in court. I decided to live with him because I was too scared to start at a new school midway through the year. He later dated a woman who was largely responsible for the breakdown of their marriage, and he became angry when I did not treat her like a mother. Mom is now trying to get custody, and I said I would burn his house to the ground if it meant she would win. Story 10. My wife was a senior staff member for a local science fiction convention. Not only was she an unpaid volunteer, she had to take a vacation day from work and pay for her hotel room and parking. On the morning the convention started, she was setting up the first of the 3 rooms she was responsible for, doing manual labor, moving tables, setting up shelves, and loading them with supplies. Someone came in, took her identification badge from her desk, and brought it to the convention lost and found. The lost and found attendant told her there was a $5 fee to retrieve lost badges. My wife looked at the badge and at the attendant and said, "Keep it. I'm going home. Have a nice convention." She was about 25 feet down the hall when the attendant caught up with her and returned her badge. Story 11. Middle school was difficult for me. I was heavily bullied at school, both mentally and physically. I did not feel supported at home. I was not in a good place. I had many thoughts of hurting others and myself. Thankfully, I never had access to a gun, or I might have become one of those school shooters. That is how deeply depressed I was. I ended up in a psychiatric ward, and those places were terrible. I did not get any help and only learned to bottle my feelings up more. Story 12. I can attest to being around people who were love-starved and later became self-sabotaging or otherwise destructive. In a gentler sense, when I felt rejected, I found peace in burning bridges to discover myself. Story 13. We moved to a new town and started attending a new church when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. I told the pastor and asked for advice. The pastor announced this to the congregation and also told them that a woman's horse was sick. The whole congregation comforted the woman and was in tears over the horse while my dad was dying. No one said a word to my family. I have not returned to church since. Story 14. Whenever I am in a meeting where my suggestions are consistently ignored and I am interrupted and talked over, I get the weirdest urge to prove I still exist by jumping on the table and singing the Queen of the Night aria. Update. There is a lot of good advice in the replies. About 60% of my meetings this is not an issue. In the other 40% it is because a few coworkers resort to yelling when confronted politely. Their managers have been informed. Story 15. In 7th grade I was bullied constantly by 3 different kids, and the school showed little interest in helping me. I was physically bullied, verbally mocked, and humiliated in front of other children, and no one batted an eye. When I finally followed my mother's advice to make a scene the next time someone threw things at me, I did so. We were outside that day for physical education class, and while we were sitting in lines at the start of class, a boy in the line next to me started throwing pebbles. I ignored it at first, but when he kept going I yelled at him to stop. I didn't care that people were staring. I wanted them to see that this average height, able-bodied boy was throwing things at me, a very small, disabled girl. The teacher came over and asked what had happened. The boy told him they were only pebbles and that he was not hurting me. The teacher agreed with him and told me that if I ever disrupted his class like that again, I would get detention. I don't know what it is about some teachers. The second they are put in charge of more than one child, they become blind to bullying. If it is pointed out, they treat the incident as isolated and as if it could not be a sign of something worse. I was 11 years old and suicidal because I felt so powerless. That teacher only solidified that feeling. Story 16. When I was a kid, my dad beat me pretty often. When he was sober, I usually did something to deserve it. When he was not, it was just go time. One night, when I was 14, he got drunk. When I got home from a girlfriend's place, he cornered me and put a revolver to my head. He told me how worthless I was and that he would be doing me a favor by killing me. I did not respond. I did not move. I just waited for him to pull the trigger. He did not. He left my room, leaving the revolver on my dresser as he walked out. I took the revolver and went outside. I walked around my hometown, sat by the river, and thought about all the ways I could get back at him for the misery he had caused my mother, my sister, and me. I also considered doing the old Kurt Cobain thing, but that is not relevant. I took the weapon apart and threw its pieces in the river. No one has asked me about the gun since. It is probably still there. Wow, that blew up. Thank you for the upvotes and awards. Story 17. Dumped at the doorstep of a youth shelter after my mother was hospitalized and my father was in prison. I wasn't a very bright teenager, but I had enough sense to spend my last $20 on pepper spray and padlocks for my things. Predictably, people's belongings went missing all the time. I could write an essay on the issues in the public welfare system, from the macro level, such as lack of funding, to the micro level, such as incompetent or burned out staff. There was violence, substance use, and sexual assault in crisis accommodation, but what bothers me 10 years later is the sheer stupidity of some adults who are meant to guide at-risk teenagers. I would ask my social worker questions like, are there places that can help me with food this week? How do I write a resume? The social worker would vaguely shrug and offer relaxation techniques and mindfulness strategies. 3 people got arrested at this shelter last week. No amount of relaxation techniques is going to calm me down. I made stupid and irresponsible choices as a teenager, but I eventually finished high school and then 3 university degrees. I now work for the same system that I am disappointed in, and there are so many practical resources available. They are underutilized because staff do not even know they exist. If I had just a single adult to help me with the simplest tasks as a kid, it would have been so much easier. When you are a kid, you do not know how university loan applications, taxes, and budgeting work. Or at least I did not. Everyone assumes that you do because they do. I had no idea that in my country the Department of Housing can pay for your rental bond. I stayed in a homeless shelter for an extra 1 to 2 months to save up $900 to pay the bond for a substandard apartment. Extra months of broken sleep, men trying to pick the lock to my door, residents high on methamphetamine. Last year, there was a 16-year-old girl on the train having a meltdown and making a public scene. She was clearly intoxicated and people avoided her. She started screaming that she had missed her period and asked if anyone would pay for her termination. She phrased it as a joke or a way to get money, which I did not give. I wondered if it was true. We talked and I referred her to a social service, downloaded a list of resources in her catchment area and saved forms on her phone about how to arrange her own health care card since she was over 15, so she could visit a bulk billing general practitioner on her own and get tested. In my country, a urine test from a pharmacy costs about $15, but a pregnancy blood test ordered by your general practitioner is free. We discussed different options her general practitioner might outline and other helpful things. I know it is not always that straightforward, especially with 30 patients in your caseload and juggling them with a million other priorities. In the biopsychosocial framework of health, where biological, psychological, and social factors are proposed to impact physical and mental health, we severely underestimate the impact of social circumstances. We let these kids down all the time, and it is preventable. Story 18. I was bullied relentlessly, sometimes violently, in middle and high school. The administration turned their backs on me when I needed help, but they were always quick to come down on me like a ton of bricks for the smallest mistake. I became a loner and went from a straight A student to failing nearly every class. I felt betrayed and abandoned by everyone I trusted to help me at that school. An undiagnosed mental illness did not help. If I had had access to weapons back then, I might have become a statistic. Luckily, this was 20 years ago, and I have received help through counseling and medication. Story 19. At my old job, many people quit when I did. They will survive, but the atmosphere is not nearly as light anymore because all the fun people left except one, and the turnover rate is very high. Story 20. Working in public accounting as an auditor meant 65-plus-hour weeks, clients yelling about things that were not my fault, managers scolding me for being over or under budget on a client, staying in hotels 5 nights a week during busy season, and eating poorly because I never had time to cook. One of the best days of my life was when I was laid off. It opened the door to a great opportunity without those problems. Story 21. I grew up in an incredibly privileged but emotionally abusive family, and I never really fit in. They frequently gaslit me. One tactic that made me feel like I was going crazy was claiming that everyone hated each other while acting as if I was the only one who fought with anyone else and then banding together against me. I have moved out now, but there were many nights when I felt like I was losing my mind and could burn the house down and not look back. I am glad I did not. There is always a better way out. I am not a heavy Reddit user, and this is the first comment I have had with any real engagement. It is nice to hear there are other people who have dealt with the same things and are still surviving. It is good to know people are not alone in this. Stay strong and live well. Story 22. It's probably my relationship with my dad. My stepmother was always, well, cruel, and I finally got the courage to tell him that I couldn't stand her, that she was rude to me when he wasn't around, and that I didn't want to go to his house anymore for fear of bullying from her and her kids. He told me she wasn't leaving and that I needed to get over it. We didn't talk much for 13 years. Fast forward to today, and she has the audacity to tell people she has granddaughters, my children, but for the sake of mending my relationship with my dad, I don't go and set her straight or tell her to fuck off. God, I hate that woman. Story 23. I already am. Therapy is a magical process where you learn to burn away what is bad for you and bring that to your family. My family seems somewhat accepting of my burning away the things that are hurting us and keeping the good parts, though. Story 24. The church group I grew up in was like this. If you did not go to the right school, did not send your kids to the Bible summer camp, had a child or other family member publicly sinned, or were not a married 20-something with 3 kids and an active leader, you were shunned. It took me 20 years to see through the bullshit and another 7 to finally feel free. I would burn it all to the ground for the harm they put people through. Edit. For those asking, I grew up in the Churches of Christ, a fundamentalist group mostly in the southeastern United States. We have an entwined history with the Latter-day Saint movement. We actually influenced them a bit. Look up Sidney Rigdon and Alexander Campbell if you want the Cliff Notes. Story 25. Once, when I was working at a psychiatric hospital, the chief executive officer assumed I smoked drugs because I had dreadlocks. I worked hard for those patients, and they trusted me. I shielded the hospital from nearly weekly patient riots. After being unfairly judged and made to look dispensable, I almost set the patients loose in the facility. Then I realized it would be selfish. The people I cared about would be punished for fighting my fight, and they would become fuel for my anger. Story 26. I was raised in a cult. There were 11 children and 4 mothers, and the leader had convinced our mothers that he was the Archangel Michael. I tried to run away repeatedly in my late teenage years, hiking across the desert at night to reach the highway where I would try to hitch a ride. Each time, well-intentioned truckers called the police to report a little girl walking along the highway with her thumb out. I was short and had been malnourished my entire childhood, so even after I turned 18, I was underdeveloped and could not convince anyone I was an adult. The leader always had me returned as a runaway, and the police took me back. The last time I was 20, and when I saw the police lights, I felt so hopeless that I seriously considered attacking the officer with a knife I always carried in case I was picked up by a dangerous person. I knew I was too small and weak to hurt the officer, but he would have had to arrest me and send me to jail. It was the only way out I could think of. Story 27. The theater department at my college, despite building its entire persona on empathy, was the most judgmental, cliquish, and least empathetic group of people I have ever known. If you were not part of the in-crowd, you did not receive the same support. Many of us existed on the outskirts, working hard only to watch the same few people get all the opportunities, including being cast in lead roles after they graduated. As I struggled with depression, anxiety, and undiagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I worked tirelessly to keep up with my peers, only to be told I needed to apply myself more. I saw people put in half the work that some of us did and still get higher grades. One professor gave arbitrary grades to more than 4 hours of homework he assigned based on page counts and who he thought deserved a higher grade. I tried so hard and received no support in return, which left me suicidal and forced me to take a semester off to deal with my mental health. It then took 2 more years and another medical break before I finally graduated. Story 28. When I was about 15, I got in a fight with a friend over something stupid. I went home shaking with rage, having a full puberty meltdown. I was stomping up and down the hallway, breathing through my teeth. At one point, I went into the kitchen, took a knife, and started talking to God, saying, "Forgive me for what I do to him," laughing out loud at myself. I am embarrassed when I think about that. Story 29. Dig in for a different kind of story than most in this thread. It is not about me. It is about someone I used to know. Growing up, I was part of a large, diverse friend group. People from different schools and small towns, all walks of life. I feel fortunate for that. One of these guys, let's call him Big Bob, was in our group for years. He came from a tough family and never had much money, but he brought energy to the party. Always talking loud, good with jokes, memes, and references. Those of us who had the means found ways to help him because we enjoyed his company. This worked for years. We'd drive him home, help him sneak into the movie theater, and share food and alcohol with him. As he got older, he began to shoplift. At first, it was candy bars at the cash register, then an odd piece of clothing he'd stuff down his shorts, then portable hard drives taken in the Best Buy bathroom. Eventually, he was caught by the police, which seemed to deter him for a while. But then he moved to things the law would not catch up to. Games were not returned in a timely manner. Eventually, we found out he had sold an old Xbox and games that someone had loaned him after they bought the new Xbox 360. We wanted to have a local area network party and needed another system, and that's how we discovered he had sold it for petty cash. He never told anybody. This continued. Little things went missing repeatedly. I went off to college and he did not, but those who stayed home told stories. Eventually, a friend who had been stolen from confronted Big Bob. He denied everything and we ostracized him. I knew he was in a bad place. He had a temper. I had seen him lose it and smash his phone on concrete. I know he felt like burning the house down after that confrontation. Nothing happened, but after growing up with him for 10 years, I am sure it was a whirlwind that night. In the end, it was deserved. We had tried to make him part of the village, or at least I hope I did. Story 30. I grew up in a dysfunctional family, though I felt very loved because I was the youngest. I am from a culture where you are not supposed to be gay. I always knew that I was loved for the wrong reason and that the moment I came out, everybody would hate me to the core. The facade I kept up lasted into my mid-20s. One day I updated my social media and came out. My family has not spoken to me since then. It has been 6 years. I guess the fire is still burning. Edit. Thank you all for your kind words. It means a lot. I know many of you are concerned, but I have found my own family. I have a best friend who is there for me from when I wake up until I go to bed and vice versa. Had she been a man, we would probably be married by now. I also need to clear something up. One of my brothers still speaks to me. I get to speak to his children, and he has changed the way I used to see him. Growing up, he had a mental illness, and in my family, we did not believe in that either. I feel terrible remembering that from my early teens until I was 20, I was angry at him and said that I did not believe his behavior was anything more than attention-seeking. Took a toll on the family, and I was angry at him for a long time. I have said things I will probably have to live with for the rest of my life. When I came out, he was the only one who did not stop talking to me. The family member seen as crazy, the way mentally ill people are viewed in our culture, was the only one who was there for me. I never mentioned that in my original post, and I feel it should be mentioned. Today, I would put him above everyone else in my family, whether they come around or not. Soon after I came out, he had one of his episodes and no one persuaded him to go to the hospital to restart his medication. I was on the phone with him from the other side of the world for 3 days until I convinced him to go to the hospital, where they helped him. I like to think he forgives me for the things I used to say because I am doing everything to show him that there is nothing wrong with his mental illness. Edit 2. I just received my first silver award. Thank you to whoever gave it. Story 31. My parents were abusive drug addicts and were known throughout the town. As a child, I was treated as if I were using meth. People tried to have me removed from classes because I would be a bad influence. Teachers made fun of me or kicked me out of class for things like playing in the rain and coming in wet, even though they knew I walked to school. One thing really stuck out. The day my parents died, they died a day apart, which blurred together. A cop pulled me over. I was 18, homeless, and had no support. He told me I had done nothing wrong, then handed me a $90 seatbelt ticket and said, "Don't turn out like your parents," in a harsh tone. My blood boiled. I just wanted out of that town, but I was broke. I stuck to education. I trained as an emergency medical technician, earned a fire science degree, and secured a position on the local fire department. I did not think much about my past until one day I responded to a car accident. The car was overturned and the driver was understandably panicked. When I got to him to let him know help was there, it was the same cop. I would never refuse care. I would not imagine doing so to anyone, and it never crossed my mind. But he seemed to think I would leave him to die and looked at me like I was a threat. Instead, I helped him, and he was proud of what I had become. I explained to him what he had done, and he acknowledged it. Talking to me and hearing my point of view was eye-opening for him. I still think it is ironic that he thought I would kill him over a ticket. Story 32. I am a 20-year-old woman who spent several months in a mental institution. I was a young teen when I was first admitted. The staff were extremely abusive to most patients, although some were spared because they were meek. I was tricked into admitting to an infraction. I had not committed and was confined to my room for several days. I tried to file a complaint, but it went nowhere. The staff were unkind and treated patients as burdens. I was lonely and sank deeper into depression. I kept my head down until my release several months later. As an adult, those months still haunt me. I struggle to feel worthwhile and criticize myself for the smallest things because the hospital conditioned me to nitpick and punish myself for not being perfect. I have picked up the phone many times, trying to work up the courage to call the hospital director and confront him, but I have never gone through with it. Story 33. When I was in 7th grade, my parents got divorced. My anger and sadness continued to grow. One Thursday night, my father picked up my siblings for the obligatory meal out. I declined to go. I went into my room and started messing around with my chemistry set. Picture this. A farmhouse built in 1830, burlap walls in my bedroom, hundreds of comic books, and wall-to-wall carpeting. Your standard tinderbox. Instead of using a Bunsen burner for my heat source, I used an empty plastic margarine container. Instead of following any safety protocols, I set the fuel on the carpet and lit it. To my surprise, the plastic melted almost immediately, and the fuel soaked the carpet. Before I knew what had happened, flames were licking the walls and furniture. At this point, I had the good sense to yell fire to my mother, who was blissfully unaware in the kitchen. She called 911 while I ran in and out of the inferno trying to save my Marvel and DC comics. Thankfully, the emergency services arrived quickly and were able to contain the damage to my bedroom. It was completely blackened. For years, I believed the whole thing was a terrible accident. Only as an adult can I admit one simple fact: my pain and need to be seen manifested in the torching of my own room. Story 34. I am in the process of starting a fire now. My negligent, narcissistic mother has pushed me over the edge. In this latest episode, she came into town in October. I took 2 extra days off from work, which is hard to recover from, and I spent about $400 over the long weekend on food and entertainment. It turns out she has been bad-mouthing me to my sister and aunt, saying I would not let her stay longer even though my mother never directly asked to stay. She called to tell me I made her cry. This from a woman who did not brush my hair growing up. Story 35. I was a senior who was friends with 4 juniors in a group. I wasn't exactly part of their circle, but they seemed to enjoy my company. I was both the funny friend and the therapist. I helped them through their prom fiasco when they were at odds and occasionally made them food. At my graduation, they said we should get together for something fun and bonding before I left for college, and one of them said she would plan a party. A month later, I invited them all to a movie. One by one, they flaked during the week before the showing, and I ended up going alone. Another month passed, and they maintained radio silence. Over the next few months, I invited them to various events, and without fail, none of them were available. I asked about doing something together and had no luck. Meanwhile, I watched their Instagram posts of lake trips and a New Year's Eve party. Now I am typing this on Reddit before going to bed and leaving tomorrow for an out-of-state college. Story 36. That is a badass proverb if I do say so myself. I work in the corporate sector. Story 37. If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear. I have never done this in real life, but I have in video games. Story 38. When I told my mom I was being sexually abused, the first words out of her mouth were, "Nobody wants to touch you." Story 39. In grade school, all my classmates were hostile, judgmental, uncaring, manipulative, or a combination of those traits. The teachers did not help. Some even tried to bully me into thinking I was stupid. I tried talking to older and younger students sometimes, but that only led to more bullying. My parents did not help either. Their only advice was to preach obedience and to wait. It is far in the past and does not affect me anymore. If I ever have or adopt children, I will try to give them the guidance I received far too late. Story 40. I always feel like a loser in school. I have friends but end up alone 95% of the time. It's rough. Story 41. My family does not know that I have hit it big in my industry, which they said you would need superhuman talent or a lot of luck to make it in. I am getting my finances and logistics in order, and next week I am moving out unexpectedly. The movers I have hired to take the few possessions I am bringing arrive sometime in the morning, and my flight leaves in the afternoon. I will leave a letter explaining that I have not harmed myself, but they are not likely to see me for a long time. I have my own phone on my own plan, a plane ticket, and a place lined up on the other side of the country. My family will not take it well since they thrive on control and conflict, and I expect the whole family to implode from finger-pointing and attention-seeking once I am gone. Story 42. I suppose I started the fire, actually. I was the only child in my family to go to college. I am from Ireland, so it was not a financial decision. I was just the only one who worked hard enough in school to have any chance. In my final 2 years, I studied every day, even during the summer and winter holidays. My 2 siblings at best showed up for school. One rarely did, and the other showed up high most of the time. That was the pattern for my whole childhood. My parents focused their attention on the so-called problem children, completely ignoring my needs, wants, and achievements. I was left alone to do my homework or expected to help my siblings, even when one of them was older and tackling coursework I had not yet encountered. They were not abusive, just bad parents. If my brother or sister got straight C's, we would go out to dinner to celebrate. I scored in the top 5% nationally on math twice in a row. The second time, I did not even get a congratulations. Then came college and exposure to new ideas. I came out as transgender to my parents, which they ignored, like most things I said. One sibling worked in hotels and eventually traveled the world doing charity and conservation work and teaching English. The other moved out, got a hotel job he hated, and barely ever called. I stayed at home because it is not common in Ireland to move out during college if you do not have to. I could not work because of the heavy workload and a long commute of 4 hours a day. Siblings were in and out of the family home, and we began to fight a lot. I was not working, so my parents assumed I did not understand the real world, although I had worked 40 hours a week during summer vacations. I stopped doing well in college, and they assumed I was slacking. I was in therapy and on medication for depression brought on by stress and neglect. I eventually went to the United States, where I met my fiancée for the first time. We spent a glorious couple of months together before I had to travel home because, once again, I had failed college. I had one class to make up, so I put my future on hold and returned to Ireland, relieved that at least my sister was still in China. She surprised the whole family by coming home for good 3 days after I returned. To cut a long story short, I finished college and was a week away from flying back to my fiancée. We were watching a science documentary together. My sister started explaining something about it incorrectly to the youngest sibling. I corrected her and she told me I was wrong. When I told her I literally had a science degree, the reason I was home at all, she said I did not really graduate college because I had not had to take another exam. I had been allowed to make up my grade. I lost it. I cursed her out for being an awful person who talks down to everyone, who had not held a real job for 3 years and had barely scraped through high school. I yelled at my father for enabling her, allowing her to walk over family members because she is loud. My mother asked what was wrong, and I told her she had raised a hateful, spiteful daughter. I spent the next week at a friend's house before traveling home to pack for the flight. The night before I left, my mother told me she would get up in the morning to wish me goodbye and good luck as I started my new life in America. She did not. The fire is not really that warm. Story 43. On the side, I do dog rescue. My social media feed is filled with urgent cases of animals facing euthanasia and with news reports of repeated abuse, sexual assault, starvation, beatings, and dogfighting, some accompanied by graphic photos. If I respected life less and had combat skills, I might be tempted to respond with violence. Fortunately, I am not like that, and I refuse to become one of them. Instead, I do what I can to heal the mess they leave behind. Story 44. Right now, I cannot seem to catch a break. I feel overwhelmed by everything. I experienced debilitating sickness. That physical pain, combined with mental pain, rage, and anguish from losses over 3 short months, led me to attempt to break an unbreakable window. I fractured my elbow and was alone in the emergency room. I have not eaten solid food in weeks. I am losing my patience and all my energy. Sending kind notes to strangers on the internet is the only thing keeping me going. Please do not shed a tear. I just need to vent. Story 45. My aunt was killed by a drunk driver in 2013. We took in her 3 youngest children, a set of twins 9 months younger than me and her 6-year-old. I'm an only child. We went from a family of 3 to a family of 6 overnight, and it was hell. Not only were we all grieving, but my parents quite literally did not care about me, or how I felt, for good reason. Now that I am older, I understand better, but at 16 I did not understand at all. I had always been my parents' #1 priority. Why were they worrying about her children before me? I was severely depressed and honestly worse off mentally than her children were. I did not get help. I did not get therapy. Did not even go to the Mothers Against Drunk Driving meetings that my parents and the other children attended because they never told me about them. My feelings were suddenly invalid and I just wanted to die. I did not want to make the situation worse by killing myself, but I also did not want to be alive anymore. I told my mom one night that sometimes I thought about taking all of my sleeping pills and going to bed and not waking up, and she told me to shut up and go to bed. I built up such resentment toward my mom because she never helped me. She was my mom. I needed her, and she was not there for me. 6 years later, I can forgive, but I will never forget how low I felt. Story 46. It is a great quote, but not an African proverb. The origin of the quote is this passage. If the fires that innately burn inside youths are not intentionally and lovingly added to the hearth of community, they will burn down the structures of culture just to feel the warmth. Michael Meade, Men and the Water of Life, 1993. The author is Celtic. Story 47. A possible fire was reported at my apartment, and I was leaving when the fire department arrived. I was stopped at the red light in front of my door when two fire trucks approached, one behind me and one in front. The truck in front pointed to the sidewalk, so I pulled up tight to the building across the street to give them room, pressing against a telephone pole. Both trucks pulled up beside me and blocked me in. I watched from the driver's seat as firefighters raised a ladder to the roof and began preparing their equipment. I got out and asked one of them if this was serious, because I had a pet in my unit. He assured me it was a routine call. There was no visible smoke or flames. I sighed with relief and waited by my car with my girlfriend and two of her friends. A few minutes later, the front door of my apartment opened and 3 firefighters emerged. The back door to my unit had been nailed shut when I moved in, with the doorknob removed. We had placed a light bookshelf in front of it, facing my television. For these men to exit from inside the apartment meant they had forced that door open, which they had. It also meant both doors were now wide open and my 6-month-old kitten could escape. I ran into the building to find my living room in shambles. My bookshelf had fallen and destroyed my television, and my kitten was nowhere to be found. After a few minutes of moving furniture and checking every nook and cranny, I was distraught and left the apartment to search the surrounding area. I lived on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston at the time, in a busy neighborhood with people, cars, and trains all around. This was no place for a kitten. My girlfriend, her friends, and I split up to search the area. But after 20 minutes, there was no sign of my kitten. With my girlfriend in tears and her friends' heads hanging low, we returned to my car to collect ourselves. Then my neighbor called out, "Can you believe that?" Looked up to see her pointing at the parking ticket on my windshield. I had been given a ticket for parking on the sidewalk, which I had been instructed to do by the very firefighters who had just damaged my apartment and lost my pet. The ticket was for over $100. I took my jacket off, picked up the ticket, and stormed across the street toward 2 police officers standing in front of my building. As I approached them, I yelled, "Which one of you did this?" Startled, one man pointed to the emergency medical technician badge on his shirt and explained that he was not a police officer. Even more enraged at my mistake, I turned to find actual police officers and saw a group of 4 or 5 standing in the street. Blinded by rage, I yelled, "I'm going to knock a cop out," as I stomped toward them. An older police officer stepped in and stopped me. He slapped the back of my neck, spun me around, ripped the ticket out of my hand and said, "Just shut up and walk with me." He asked what had happened, I explained, and he tore the ticket in half and told me to forget about it, that someone had made a mistake. He told me to take a breath and calm down, and warned me never to do that again. He was right. In hindsight, it was a very dumb and immature thing to say. I had no intention of harming anyone. All the officers were much larger than I was, and they were armed. When the drama died down and the police and firefighters left, I parked legally and returned to my apartment with my girlfriend to assess the damage. As we began picking up the rubble, we heard a rustle from under the bed. In a panic, my kitten had crawled into a purse inside, a duffel bag to hide from the firefighters, a hiding spot so small and cozy that he had decided to stay and nap the entire time we were searching for him. The relief of finding him almost made up for the destroyed living room and my own foolish behavior toward the officers. I'm glad things ended the way they did. I was more than prepared to try to burn the whole place down that day, but I sincerely doubt I could have even managed a spark before I ended up in county lockup for the night. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.